The airport was crowded that Tuesday afternoon. Captain James Anderson walked through the terminal with his carry-on bag rolling behind him. He had just finished flying a 12-hour shift from London to New York, and now he was finally heading home to Chicago. His body ached from exhaustion, and all he wanted was to sink into his first-class seat and close his eyes for the 3-hour flight ahead. James was still wearing his casual clothes, a simple navy blue sweater and jeans. His pilot uniform was neatly folded in the garment bag he carried over his shoulder. After 15 years of flying commercial jets, he had learned to change out of his uniform as soon as his shift ended. It was more comfortable that way, and honestly, he just wanted to feel like a regular person heading home after a long day at work. As he approached his gate, James glanced at his boarding pass one more time. Seat 2A, first-class window seat. Perfect. He had earned enough miles over the years that upgrades were common for him, but today he had actually paid for the ticket himself. It was his wedding anniversary, and he wanted to get home on time without any delays or complications. His wife Rachel was probably already preparing dinner, and he had promised he would not be late this time. The boarding process began, and James stood in line with the other first-class passengers. He noticed a few business travelers in expensive suits, a couple who looked like they were heading on vacation, and an older gentleman reading a newspaper. When his turn came, he handed his boarding pass to the flight attendant at the gate. The woman took his pass and scanned it. Her name tag read Christine. She looked at the screen, then looked at James, then looked at the screen again. Her smile seemed to freeze on her face. "Can I see your ID, please?" she asked. James reached for his wallet and handed her his driver's license. This was normal procedure, nothing unusual. But something about the way Christine was looking at him made him slightly uncomfortable. She studied his ID for what felt like too long, comparing the photo to his face multiple times. "Is everything okay?" James asked politely. "Yes, just one moment," Christine said. She scanned his boarding pass again, and this time she frowned. "Sir, I think there might be an error with your ticket." James felt a small knot form in his stomach. "What kind of error?" "Well, the name on this ticket, it does not match what I am seeing in our system for seat 2A. James leaned forward slightly. "That is my seat. James Anderson. That is my name right there on the boarding pass." Christine turned the screen away from him. "I understand, sir, but I need to verify this. Can you wait here for just a moment?" She walked away before James could respond, leaving him standing there at the gate entrance. Other passengers were lining up behind him now, and he could feel their eyes on his back. He stepped aside to let them pass, feeling his face grow warm with embarrassment. A few minutes later, Christine returned with another flight attendant, a tall man named Kevin. They both looked at James with suspicious expressions, as if he had done something wrong. "Sir, we are going to need to see some additional identification," Kevin said. His tone was not friendly or helpful. It was cold and formal. James kept his voice calm. "I already showed my driver's license. What else do you need? Do you have a passport? A credit card? Anything else with your name on it?" This was getting ridiculous, but James decided to cooperate. He pulled out his passport and his credit card. He also pulled out something else, something he hoped would end this nonsense immediately: his pilot's license and his employee ID card from the airline, the same airline whose plane he was about to board as a passenger. Kevin took the IDs and examined them carefully. He showed them to Christine, and they whispered to each other. James could not hear what they were saying, but he could see the doubt on their faces. They did not believe him. Or worse, they did not want to believe him. "Sir, these could be fake," Kevin finally said. James felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Those are official documents. I am a captain for this airline. I fly the same aircraft you are about to take off in. I have been doing this job for 15 years. If you are really a pilot, why are not you in uniform?" Christine asked. "Because I just finished my shift. I am traveling as a passenger now on my own time, going home to my family." Kevin crossed his arms. "Look, we have had problems with people trying to scam their way into first class. We need to verify this with our supervisor. We cannot just let anyone sit in premium seats, anyone." The word hung in the air like smoke. James knew exactly what was happening here. He had experienced it before in different forms, in different places, but never quite like this. Never this blatant. Never this humiliating. "I have shown you 5 different forms of identification," James said quietly. "What exactly are you trying to verify?" Before they could answer, James heard a voice from behind him. "Excuse me, but I saw his ticket when we were in line. It looked completely legitimate to me." An elderly white woman had stepped forward. She was one of the other first-class passengers, and she looked genuinely concerned. James appreciated her support, but Christine barely acknowledged her. "Ma'am, we have procedures we need to follow. Please board the aircraft." The woman hesitated, then gave James an apologetic look before walking down the jetway. James was alone again with the two flight attendants who clearly did not want him on their plane. "We need you to step aside and wait while we sort this out," Kevin said. "Maybe you should consider taking a seat in economy until we can confirm everything." James could not believe what he was hearing. "You want me to give up my first-class seat? The seat I paid for? We are just trying to avoid any issues once the plane is boarded." By now, other passengers were starting to notice the commotion. James could hear whispers and see people staring. Some looked curious, others looked uncomfortable, and a few looked annoyed at the delay. One man in an expensive suit walked past and muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Some people will do anything for a free upgrade these days." A few passengers laughed. James felt his hands clench into fists, but he kept them at his sides. He would not give them any reason to call security. He would not give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose his temper. 20 minutes passed. 20 minutes of standing there while other passengers boarded around him, while Christine and Kevin made phone calls and whispered to each other, while James felt his dignity being stripped away piece by piece in front of dozens of strangers. Then James noticed something that made his heart sink even further. Near the back of the boarding line, a teenage boy was watching everything. The kid could not have been more than 16 or 17 years old, and he was black. His face showed a mixture of anger and sadness and something else. Recognition. He had seen this before, or experienced it himself, or heard stories about it from his parents and grandparents. The boy's mother pulled him along, shaking her head, telling him silently not to get involved, not to say anything, to just keep his head down and get on the plane. That look on the kid's face changed something in James. This was not just about him anymore. This was about every black person who had been told they did not belong somewhere, who had been questioned and doubted and humiliated for no reason other than the color of their skin. James pulled out his phone. His hands were steady now, his mind clear. "I need to make one call," he said quietly. Christine actually smirked. "Sir, calling someone is not going to change our procedures." James did not respond. He just walked a few steps away, found the number he needed, and pressed dial. The person on the other end answered on the second ring. What happened next would change everything. James stepped into the jetway, away from the crowd of staring passengers. His finger hovered over a contact in his phone that he had saved years ago, but never thought he would actually need to use. The name on the screen read, Robert Chen, COO Direct Line. Robert Chen was the chief operating officer of the entire airline. James had met him 3 years earlier under very different circumstances. There had been an emergency on a flight from Seattle to Boston. An engine failure at 30,000 feet, smoke filling the cabin, passengers screaming in terror. James had been the captain that day, and his quick thinking and steady hands had saved 237 lives. He had landed that crippled plane safely, and Robert Chen had personally flown out to meet him the next day. They had sat in a quiet office, and Robert had shaken his hand for a long time. "You are the kind of person we need leading our aircraft," Robert had said. "You are the kind of person who makes me proud to work for this company." Then he had written his personal cell phone number on a business card and handed it to James. "If you ever need anything, you call me directly, day or night." I mean that. James had tucked that card into his wallet and honestly forgot about it most of the time. He never wanted special treatment. He never wanted to be the guy who called the boss to solve his problems. But standing there in that jetway, after being humiliated in front of dozens of people, after seeing that teenager's face and knowing this was bigger than just him, James pressed the call button. Robert answered on the third ring. "This is Robert. Mr. Chen, this is Captain James Anderson. I apologize for calling you directly, but I have a situation that I think you need to know about." James heard the sound of papers rustling on the other end. "James? The James Anderson who landed that 737 with one engine 3 years ago? Of course I remember you. What is going on?" James took a deep breath and explained everything. He kept his voice calm and professional, the same voice he used when reporting problems to air traffic control. He described how Christine and Kevin had questioned his ticket, demanded multiple IDs, refused to believe his pilot's license was real, suggested he was trying to scam his way into first class, and asked him to move to economy. He mentioned the passenger who made the comment about free upgrades and the laughter that followed. He talked about the 20 minutes of public humiliation. The line went silent for a moment. Then Robert's voice came back, and it was completely different. Cold, hard, angry. Are you telling me that 2 of my flight attendants are accusing one of my senior captains of fraud? Are you telling me they refuse to verify your credentials properly? Are you telling me this is happening right now at this very moment? Yes, sir. I am still at the gate. They have not let me board. What flight number? James told him. Stay exactly where you are, James. Do not go anywhere. Do not hang up this phone. Give me 2 minutes. James could hear typing in the background, then Robert's voice speaking to someone else in his office. Get me operations right now. Yes, right now. I do not care if they are in a meeting. Less than a minute later, James heard a phone ringing inside the aircraft. Through the open door of the jetway, he could see Christine rushing to answer the phone mounted on the wall near the boarding door. She picked it up, said hello, and then her entire face changed. The color drained from her cheeks. Her hand started shaking. Yes, sir. I understand. No, we did not. I thought, yes, sir. Right away, sir. She hung up and immediately turned to Kevin, grabbing his arm and whispering urgently. Kevin's expression went from confused to shocked to terrified in about 3 seconds. They both looked toward the jetway where James was standing, but Robert was not done. James could hear him on the phone talking to someone else now. I want the gate agent supervisor down there immediately. I want regional management notified. I want the captain of that aircraft informed of what happened. And I want a full report on my desk within the hour explaining how 2 flight attendants thought it was acceptable to racially profile one of our own pilots. James felt something shift inside his chest. Robert had said it. He had named it. Racial profiling. The thing that everyone knew was happening, but nobody wanted to say out loud. James, are you still there? Robert asked. Yes, sir, I am here. I am sorry this happened to you. I am sorry you had to make this call. And I promise you, this is not over. Not by a long shot. James saw movement at the gate. A woman in a dark blue suit was speed-walking toward the aircraft, followed by 2 men in similar uniforms. Management had arrived. The gate area, which had been relatively calm a few minutes ago, was now buzzing with activity. Then James saw something that caught him completely off guard. The captain of the flight, a man James had actually flown with once or twice before, came rushing out of the cockpit and down the jetway. His face was red and he looked genuinely angry. His name was David Sullivan, and he was one of the good ones. Fair, professional, respectful to everyone he worked with regardless of their position or background. Captain Sullivan spotted James and walked straight up to him with his hand extended. James, what in the world is going on? I just got a call from operations saying my crew denied you boarding. Please tell me that is not true. James shook his hand. I wish I could tell you that, David. Captain Sullivan's jaw clenched. I had no idea anything was happening back here. I was running through pre-flight checks. If I had known... He shook his head in disgust. Come with me. Right now. He put his hand on James's shoulder and walked him back toward the aircraft, speaking loudly enough for the entire first-class cabin to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to Captain James Anderson, one of the finest pilots this airline has ever employed. Captain Anderson will be sitting in first class today, as he should be. And I personally apologize for any delay or confusion. The passengers who had been whispering and staring earlier suddenly looked very uncomfortable. The man who had made the comment about free upgrades was now very interested in the magazine in his lap. A few passengers looked genuinely embarrassed. Christine and Kevin were standing near the galley, and the supervisor in the blue suit was speaking to them in a low, urgent voice. James could not hear what she was saying, but he could see their faces. They knew they were in serious trouble. Christine, Kevin, I need you both to step off the aircraft immediately, the supervisor said, loud enough for James to hear now. You are being removed from this flight. Christine's eyes went wide. But we were just following protocol. We were trying to verify. Off the aircraft. Now. We will discuss this at the office. James watched as both flight attendants gathered their belongings and walked past him. Christine would not look at him, but Kevin shot him a look that was half anger, half fear. They disappeared down the jetway with the supervisor right behind them. 2 new flight attendants came aboard within minutes, apologizing profusely for the delay. One of them, a young woman named Lisa, approached James with genuine kindness in her eyes. "Captain Anderson, I am so sorry for what happened to you. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee, something to eat?" James smiled at her. "Water would be great, thank you." As he settled into seat 2A, the seat he had paid for, the seat he had every right to sit in, James noticed something happening near the front of economy class. The supervisor was talking to someone back there. It was the teenage boy and his mother, the ones James had noticed earlier. The supervisor was smiling and gesturing toward the front of the plane. The mother looked confused at first, then shocked, then grateful. The teenage boy's eyes went wide as he realized what was happening. They were being moved to first class. A few minutes later, the boy and his mother walked past James's row and took seats across the aisle. The kid kept glancing over at James like he could not quite believe any of this was real. His mother leaned over and whispered something to him, and the boy nodded seriously. Then the kid did something that hit James right in the heart. He gave James a small nod, a gesture of respect and recognition and gratitude all rolled into one. It said, "Thank you for standing up. Thank you for not backing down. Thank you for showing me that we belong here too." James nodded back. The elderly woman who had spoken up earlier, the one who said his ticket looked legitimate, reached across the aisle and gently touched James's arm. "I'm glad they fixed this," she said quietly. "What they did to you was wrong. Completely wrong." "Thank you for saying something," James replied. "That took courage," she shook her head. "Not as much courage as you showed." The plane began to push back from the gate 90 minutes late. James leaned his head against the window and closed his eyes. He was exhausted, emotionally drained, and honestly still processing everything that had just happened. But there was also something else, a feeling he had not expected. Hope. Robert Chen had called him back just before takeoff. "James, this is not over. We are launching a full investigation. Christine and Kevin are suspended pending termination. But more than that, I want you to know that I am taking this to the executive board. We are going to review our entire training program, our policies on passenger verification, everything. What happened to you today should never happen to anyone, and I am going to make sure it does not." As the plane climbed into the sky, James thought about that teenage boy sitting a few rows behind him. He thought about all the other kids like him who would fly on planes in the future, who would chase their dreams, who would face obstacles and discrimination and people who did not think they belonged. He thought about the call he had made, and how one phone call had changed everything. But this was not the end of the story. This was only the beginning. The flight landed in Chicago right on schedule, despite the delayed departure. James gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the aircraft. But as he stood up, the teenage boy approached him. The kid looked nervous, like he wanted to say something but was not sure if he should. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said quietly. "I just wanted to say thank you." James looked at him with curiosity. "Thank me? For what? For not backing down back there? For standing up for yourself? I have seen stuff like that happen before, you know? People getting treated badly just because of how they look. But I never saw anyone actually do something about it that worked. You showed me that you can fight back the right way." The boy's mother had come up behind him now, and she had tears in her eyes. "My son wants to be a pilot someday," she said. "But honestly, I have been scared for him. Scared of all the obstacles he might face, all the people who might try to tell him he does not belong. Watching you today, seeing how you handled that situation with dignity and strength, it gave me hope. It gave both of us hope." James felt his throat tighten. He shook the boy's hand firmly. "What is your name, son?" "Trevor, sir." "Trevor Johnson. Well, Trevor, let me tell you something. You absolutely can become a pilot. Do not let anyone tell you different. Study hard, stay focused, and remember that you have every right to be in that cockpit. And when people try to make you feel like you do not belong somewhere, you stand tall and you prove them wrong. Understand?" Trevor nodded, and James could see the determination building in the kid's eyes. They exchanged phone numbers, and James promised to answer any questions Trevor had about becoming a pilot. As they parted ways in the terminal, James felt like something important had just happened. Maybe even more important than the confrontation at the gate. The next morning, James woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. His phone had been on silent overnight, and apparently the world had been trying to reach him. His wife Rachel was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and a strange expression on her face. "You need to see this," she said, turning the screen toward him. The story had broken on the news. Somehow, and James suspected he knew how, the incident had been leaked to the media. The headline read, "Senior pilot denied first-class seat by his own airline's crew." Several news outlets were running the story, and it was spreading fast on social media. People were outraged. The airline's phone lines were apparently flooded with complaints. James's phone rang again. It was Robert Chen. "James, I know you just saw the news. I want you to know that we did not leak this story, but I am not sorry it got out. The public needs to know what happened. More importantly, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come to the corporate office today? I have something I want to discuss with you, and I think you are going to want to hear this in person." 2 hours later, James found himself sitting in a conference room on the 42nd floor of the airline's headquarters building. Robert Chen was there, along with 3 other executives, including the Vice President of Human Resources, the Chief Diversity Officer, and the President of Flight Operations. Robert did not waste time with small talk. "James, what happened to you was unacceptable. We have completed our initial investigation, and I want you to know the findings. Christine and Kevin have been terminated. Their employment with this airline is over. We reviewed their personnel files and found a pattern of complaints that should have been addressed earlier. This was not their first incident, though it was certainly their most egregious." The Chief Diversity Officer, a woman named Patricia Wong, leaned forward. "We also discovered something disturbing during our investigation. When we pulled the recordings from the gate area and interviewed other staff members, we found that this kind of behavior has been happening more than we realized. Not always this obvious, not always this confrontational, but there have been incidents, passengers of color being questioned more thoroughly, being asked for additional documentation, being moved to different seats without clear justification. We have been blind to a serious problem in our organization." James listened carefully, feeling a mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication because they were taking it seriously, but sadness because he knew this meant countless other people had been through similar experiences. The President of Flight Operations, a veteran pilot named Richard Torres, spoke next. "James, we want to do something about this. Not just issue a statement and move on, but actually create real change. And we want your help to do it." James raised an eyebrow. "My help? How?" Robert pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "We want to create a new position in this company, Director of Equity and Inclusion for Flight Operations, someone who will oversee a complete overhaul of our training programs, our policies, our hiring practices, and our incident reporting systems, someone who will have the authority to investigate complaints, recommend disciplinary action, and implement real solutions. We want you to take that position." James stared at the folder without opening it. "I am a pilot. I fly planes. That is what I do. That is what I love doing. And you will still fly," Patricia said quickly. "This would be a dual role. You would fly reduced hours, maybe 60% of your current schedule, and spend the rest of your time building this program. We are not asking you to give up the cockpit. We are asking you to help us fix a broken system while still doing what you love." Richard added, "Think about it this way. James, you saved 237 lives 3 years ago when you landed that plane safely. How many lives could you change by making sure every employee in this company understands that discrimination has no place here? How many future pilots like that kid Trevor could you inspire?" James opened the folder and looked at the proposal. The salary was substantial, but that was not what caught his attention. What caught his attention was the scope of authority they were offering him. He would report directly to Robert Chen. He would have the power to recommend termination for discriminatory behavior. He would help design mandatory training for all employees. He would be part of the interview process for new hires. He would have a voice that could actually make a difference. "I need to think about this," James said finally. "This is a big decision." "Take all the time you need," Robert said. "But I want you to know something. When I gave you my phone number 3 years ago, I told you that you were the kind of person who makes me proud to work for this company. I meant that then, and I mean it even more now. The way you handled that situation at the gate, with dignity and composure, refusing to be intimidated or dismissed, That is the kind of character we need in leadership. Not just flying planes, but leading people. James went home and talked to Rachel for hours. She had been with him through 15 years of his career, through the late nights and the missed anniversaries and the times he came home exhausted from long-haul flights. She knew how much he loved flying, but she also knew how much that incident at the gate had affected him. "What does your gut tell you?" she asked. "My gut tells me that I could make a real difference, that I could help make sure what happened to me does not happen to other people, that I could help kids like Trevor see that they belong in aviation." Then I think you already know your answer. 3 days later, James called Robert Chen and accepted the position. The announcement was made internally first, then publicly. The response was overwhelming. James received hundreds of emails from employees thanking him, from passengers sharing their own stories of discrimination, from young people saying they were inspired to pursue careers in aviation. But the most meaningful response came from Trevor. The teenager sent James a photo of himself standing in front of a flight simulator at a local aviation school. The caption read, "First step toward the cockpit. Thank you for showing me it is possible." James printed that photo and put it on his new office wall, right next to his pilot's license. It was a reminder of why he had taken this job, why this work mattered, why one person standing up could create ripples that spread far beyond themselves. The real work was just beginning. James started by conducting listening sessions with employees of color throughout the company. He heard stories that broke his heart. Flight attendants who had been passed over for promotions. Gate agents who had been subjected to racial slurs from passengers with no support from management. Pilots who had been questioned about their qualifications in ways their white colleagues never were. Maintenance workers who had been treated as invisible. He took notes on everything. He recorded the sessions with permission. He compiled data and built presentations. And then he started the hard work of changing the culture of an organization that employed over 50,000 people. The mandatory bias training program rolled out 3 months later. Every single employee, from the CEO down to part-time gate agents, had to complete it. James helped design the curriculum himself, making sure it was not just boring videos and checkbox exercises, but real conversations about real situations. They used his story as a case study, breaking down exactly what went wrong and what should have happened instead. Some employees resisted. Some complained that it was unnecessary or that the company was being too politically correct. But James did not back down. He knew from experience that staying silent, avoiding difficult conversations, pretending problems did not exist, that was how discrimination continued to thrive. He also knew something else. Change was slow, but it was happening. And every person who learned to recognize their biases, every policy that was rewritten to be more fair, every kid like Trevor who saw someone who looked like them in a position of authority, that was progress. That was worth fighting for. And James was just getting started. 6 months into his new role, James was sitting in his office reviewing incident reports when his assistant knocked on the door. She looked excited about something. "Captain Anderson, there is someone here to see you. He does not have an appointment, but I think you will want to meet him." James looked up from his paperwork. "Who is it?" "He says his name is Dennis Mitchell. He used to work for the airline." The name did not ring a bell immediately, but James told her to send him in. A black man in his early 60s walked through the door. He was wearing a simple jacket and jeans, and his hair was gray around the temples. There was something about his eyes, though. A weariness that James recognized. It was the look of someone who had fought battles and carried scars. "Captain Anderson, thank you for seeing me without notice," Dennis said, shaking James's hand. "I know you are busy, but I needed to meet you in person. You see, I read about what happened to you, and it brought back a lot of memories, painful memories." James gestured to a chair. "Please sit down. Tell me your story." Dennis settled into the chair and took a deep breath. "I was a pilot for this airline for 23 years. Started back in 1985, retired in 2008. And in those 23 years, I experienced things that nobody should have to experience. Passengers refusing to fly with a black captain. Flight attendants questioning my authority. Gate agents treating me like I was suspicious just for existing. But back then, there was nobody to call. No system in place to report discrimination. No consequences for people who treated us badly. So I just endured it, kept my head down, and flew my routes." James felt his chest tighten. "I am sorry you went through that." "I am not here for an apology," Dennis said firmly. I am here to tell you that what you are doing matters. When I saw the news about your incident and then heard about this new program you are building, I cried. I actually cried because I wished someone had done this when I was still flying. I wished I had someone to stand up for me the way you stood up for yourself. They talked for over an hour. Dennis shared stories that made James both angry and sad. Stories of being followed by security in airports. Stories of passengers demanding to see his credentials before agreeing to fly. Stories of watching less qualified white pilots get promoted, while he was passed over again and again. And stories of other black pilots who had quit the industry entirely, because they could not take the constant discrimination anymore. How many? James asked quietly. How many pilots did we lose because of this? Dennis shook his head. I do not know the exact number, but I can think of at least a dozen off the top of my head. Good pilots. Talented pilots. People who loved flying but could not love an industry that did not love them back. Before Dennis left, he reached into his jacket and pulled out an old photograph. It showed a group of black pilots standing in front of an aircraft, all of them in uniform, all of them smiling despite everything they had probably faced. This was taken in 1992, Dennis said. We called ourselves the Brothers of the Sky. We would meet up at conferences and support each other because nobody else was going to. I want you to have this picture. Put it on your wall. Remember that you are not the first person to fight this fight, but you might be the first person with the power to actually win it. James took the photograph with shaking hands. I will. I promise I will. That evening, James could not stop thinking about Dennis and all the other pilots who had suffered in silence. He thought about the careers that had been cut short, the dreams that had been crushed, the talent that had been wasted, and he realized that his work was not just about preventing future discrimination. It was also about acknowledging past discrimination and making sure it was never forgotten. The next morning, James called an emergency meeting with Robert Chen and the other executives. He came prepared with a proposal that he had been working on all night. We need to do more than just train our current employees, James said. We need to acknowledge our failures as a company. We need to reach out to former employees who experienced discrimination and let them know that we see them, we believe them, and we are sorry. And we need to create a legacy program that honors the pioneers who paved the way for people like me. Robert listened carefully. What exactly are you proposing? James pulled out a document he had drafted. First, I want to create a scholarship program specifically for minority students pursuing careers in aviation. We fund their flight training, their education, everything. We name it after the pilots who fought through discrimination to succeed in this industry. Second, I want to commission a historical project documenting the experiences of pilots of color who worked for this airline. Their stories need to be told and preserved. And third, I want to invite former employees who experienced discrimination to participate in our training programs. Let them share their stories directly with current employees. Make it real for people. Patricia Wong, the Chief Diversity Officer, was nodding enthusiastically. This is exactly what we need. This is not just about policies and procedures. This is about changing hearts and minds. The proposal was approved within a week. James threw himself into the work with renewed energy. He tracked down retired pilots, flight attendants, and ground crew members who had experienced discrimination. Some were hesitant to talk at first, worried about reliving painful memories, but others were eager to share, grateful that someone was finally listening. One of those people was a woman named Dorothy Harris. She had been one of the first black female flight attendants hired by the airline back in 1968. She was 82 years old now, but her memory was sharp and her spirit was unbroken. They made us wear gloves, Dorothy told James during their interview. White gloves so passengers could see that our hands were clean. Can you imagine? They did not make the white flight attendants do that. Just us, and if a passenger complained about being served by a black attendant, we were reassigned to work in the back of the plane, where we would not be seen. James recorded every word. These stories would become part of the training program, part of the company's official history, part of the record that could never be erased or denied. The scholarship program launched 4 months later with a ceremony that brought together current employees, retired pioneers, and 10 scholarship recipients who were just beginning their aviation training. Trevor Johnson was one of them. The kid had applied, written a powerful essay about watching James stand up for himself at the gate, and been selected as one of the first scholarship winners. James watched Trevor walk across the stage to receive his scholarship check, And he saw the same determination in the kid's eyes that he had seen that day on the airplane. Trevor was going to make it. James was sure of that. But what moved James even more was watching Dennis Mitchell and Dorothy Harris sitting in the front row, tears streaming down their faces. They were finally being honored for their courage, their resilience, their refusal to give up, even when everything seemed stacked against them. After the ceremony, reporters swarmed James with questions. The story had attracted national media attention, and everyone wanted to know what came next. "What comes next is the hard work," James said. "Real change does not happen overnight. It happens through consistent effort, through holding people accountable, through creating systems that do not allow discrimination to hide in the shadows. We have made progress, but we are far from finished." One reporter asked, "Do you think other airlines will follow your lead?" James smiled. "I hope so. Because this is not just about one company or one industry. This is about creating a world where people are judged by their character and their competence, not by the color of their skin. That is a fight worth having." That night, James got a phone call from an unexpected source. It was Captain David Sullivan, the pilot who had defended him on the day of the incident. David had been following all the changes James was implementing, and he had a question. "James, I want to help. I know I am not the one who experienced discrimination, but I have been flying for 30 years and I have seen things that I should have spoken up about. I stayed silent when I should have been an ally. I want to do better. How can I help?" James felt a surge of hope. This was what real change looked like. Not just the victim speaking up, but allies stepping forward. People with privilege using that privilege to amplify voices that had been silenced for too long. "Come to our next training session," James said. "Share your perspective. Talk about what you witnessed and why you stayed silent. Help other people understand that this is everyone's responsibility, not just the responsibility of the people being discriminated against." David agreed immediately, and word spread. More pilots volunteered to speak at training sessions. More flight attendants stepped forward to share their own experiences of discrimination. More employees at every level began to see that this was not just a program James was running. It was a movement that was changing the entire culture of the organization. The incident reports that crossed James's desk started to change too. Instead of complaints being swept under the rug or handled quietly, people were reporting discrimination openly and expecting action. And action was being taken. Several employees were terminated for racist behavior. Others were suspended and required to complete additional training. The message was clear. Discrimination would not be tolerated, not anymore, not ever again. But James knew that the most important changes were the ones that could not be measured in reports or statistics. It was the black pilot who told him she finally felt comfortable wearing her natural hair to work. It was the Latino gate agent who said he no longer felt invisible. It was the Asian flight attendant who shared that passengers had stopped making racist jokes because they knew the company would take it seriously. These were the victories that mattered most. And James was determined to keep fighting until every employee felt safe, respected, and valued. 2 years had passed since that day at the gate. 2 years since James had made that phone call that changed everything. He was standing in the airport again, this time not as a passenger, but as a guest speaker for the airline's annual conference. Over 3,000 employees had gathered to hear about the progress of the Equity and Inclusion program. But before his speech, James had somewhere else to be. He walked through the terminal in his pilot uniform, heading toward gate C-17. He had requested this specific gate for a reason. It was the same gate where Christine and Kevin had denied him boarding. The same place where he had stood humiliated in front of dozens of strangers. The same spot where he had pulled out his phone and made the call that started everything. Today, something special was happening at this gate. A crowd had already gathered. James saw Robert Chen talking to reporters. He saw Patricia Wong organizing the event volunteers. He saw Dorothy Harris sitting in a place of honor, wearing a vintage flight attendant uniform from the 1960s. And he saw Trevor Johnson, now 18 years old, standing with his flight instructor and wearing his brand new student pilot uniform. The airline was unveiling a permanent exhibit at this gate, a memorial wall featuring photographs and stories of pioneering pilots and crew members of color who had worked for the company over the decades. Dennis Mitchell's photo was there, along with 47 others. Their stories were engraved on bronze plaques, their contributions finally being recognized publicly. But the centerpiece of the exhibit was something James had not expected. It was a photograph of him from that day 2 years ago, standing in the jetway with his phone in his hand. Below it was a plaque that read, "One person standing up for what is right can change an entire system." Captain James Anderson refused to accept discrimination, and his courage inspired a movement that transformed our company and our industry. James felt his eyes getting wet. Rachel squeezed his hand. She had been beside him through every step of this journey, through the late nights working on training programs, through the difficult conversations, through the moments when he doubted whether he was making any real difference. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Robert Chen approached the microphone to begin the ceremony. 2 years ago, something happened at this gate that should never have happened. One of our finest pilots was discriminated against by our own employees. It was a moment of shame for our company, but it was also a turning point. Captain James Anderson did not just fight for himself that day. He fought for every person who has ever been made to feel like they do not belong, and because of his courage, we are a better company today. Robert went on to share statistics. Reports of discrimination were up 300%, which actually meant the system was working. People felt safe reporting incidents now, but actual incidents of discrimination were down 67% because employees knew there would be real consequences. The company had hired 212 new pilots in the past 2 years, and 43% of them were people of color, compared to just 12% before the program began. The scholarship fund had awarded full aviation training to 68 students who could not have afforded it otherwise. But numbers only told part of the story. The real story was in the faces of the people gathered at the gate. James saw flight attendants of every race standing together, wearing pins that said "Equity in the Skies." He saw pilots who had participated in the training sessions, some of whom had admitted their own biases and worked to change. He saw ground crew members who had shared their experiences of discrimination and had been heard, truly heard for the first time. When it was James's turn to speak, he walked to the microphone and looked out at the crowd. He thought about everything that had led to this moment. The humiliation, the anger, the decision to make that phone call instead of just accepting the injustice, the risk he had taken by speaking up. "I want to tell you something that I have learned over the past 2 years," James began. "Change is not comfortable. It requires people to look at themselves honestly, to admit when they have been wrong, to do the hard work of unlearning biases that society taught them. Some of you resisted this program at first. Some of you thought it was unnecessary, or that we were making too big a deal out of one incident. I understand that discomfort, but I want you to understand something too." He paused and looked directly at Trevor, then at Dorothy, then at Dennis. "For those of us who have experienced discrimination, it is not one incident. It is a lifetime of incidents. It is death by 1,000 cuts. It is being questioned and doubted and treated as suspicious everywhere you go. It is watching your children face the same obstacles you faced and feeling helpless to protect them. So when we ask you to care about this, when we ask you to do the uncomfortable work of examining your biases, we are not asking for special treatment. We are asking to be treated like human beings, like equals, like we belong here just as much as anyone else." The room was completely silent. Some people were crying, others were nodding in agreement. James could feel the weight of the moment. "But here is what gives me hope," James continued. "I have seen people change. I have seen employees who made mistakes take responsibility and grow. I have seen allies step forward and use their voices to amplify those of us who have been silenced. I have seen young people like Trevor here, who watched me stand up for myself and decided that he belonged in aviation too. That is the power of courage. That is the power of refusing to accept injustice. One person speaking up can create ripples that spread farther than they ever imagined." After the ceremony, James was surrounded by people wanting to shake his hand, to share their own stories, to thank him for his work. But the conversation that meant the most came from someone unexpected. A young white woman approached him nervously. She looked like she was in her early 20s, and she was wearing a flight attendant trainee uniform. "Captain Anderson, can I talk to you for a minute?" she asked. Of course. She took a deep breath. "My name is Lauren Cooper. I am in the new flight attendant training class, and I need to tell you something. My aunt is Christine Mitchell, the flight attendant who denied you boarding 2 years ago. James felt his body tense, but he kept his expression neutral. I see. I know what she did was wrong, Lauren said quickly, tears forming in her eyes. I know she was fired and she deserved it. But I also want you to know that losing her job changed her. She had to face what she did, really face it. And it broke something open in her. She has been volunteering with civil rights organizations, educating herself, trying to make amends for the harm she caused. She asked me to tell you that she is sorry, truly sorry, and she understands if you never forgive her. James was quiet for a moment. He thought about Christine, about the fear and suspicion in her eyes that day at the gate. He thought about how people were not born racist but taught to be. And he thought about how people could also be taught to change. Tell your aunt something for me, James said finally. Tell her that I believe people can change. Tell her that I hope she continues the work she is doing. And tell her that forgiveness is possible, but it takes time and it takes action. If she is really committed to being better, then she has a chance to help others not make the same mistakes she made. Lauren nodded, wiping her eyes. Thank you. That is more grace than she probably deserves. Maybe, James said, but grace is not about what people deserve. It is about what kind of world we want to create. As the day wound down, James found himself back in the pilot's lounge, the same lounge where he had changed out of his uniform 2 years ago, before that fateful flight. Trevor walked in, holding his student pilot logbook like it was made of gold. Captain Anderson, I just finished my first solo flight. My instructor said I am a natural. James grinned and hugged the kid. I knew you would be. I saw it in you that first day. I have been thinking about something, Trevor said. When I become a captain someday, I want to work with you on this program. I want to help other kids like me see that they can do this too. You changed my life. I want to do the same for someone else. James felt a lump in his throat. This was the legacy he wanted to leave. Not just policies and training programs, but a generation of people who would carry this work forward, who would refuse to accept discrimination, who would stand up for themselves and others. That evening, James sat in his home office looking at the photograph Dennis Mitchell had given him. The Brothers of the Sky, standing together in 1992, fighting battles that most people never knew about. He had hung it next to Trevor's photo at the flight simulator, creating a timeline of progress and struggle and hope. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a pilot in Seattle, someone he had never met. The message said, I just completed the equity training at my airline. They said you inspired them to create it. Thank you for standing up. You made it easier for the rest of us to stand up too. James smiled. The ripples were still spreading. The movement was still growing. And somewhere out there, another person was finding the courage to speak up, to make that phone call, to refuse to accept injustice.